The first Friday of the month, and ordinarily that would mean I sit here and talk about the US labour market report. However, the September jobs report is going to be delayed because, of course, the government shutdown continuing in the United States doesn't look like any real sign of progress there. That is certainly going to drag into next week at the absolute earliest in terms of a potential resolution. Nevertheless, market participants at long last finally seem to be taking a more logical view of proceedings and actually looking past and ignoring the ongoing political pantomime that we see playing out in Washington, D.C., and sentiment is relatively positive as we move towards the back end of the week. Equities moving nicely higher across the board, the path of least resistance there continuing to lead quite clearly to the upside, and precious metals also gaining a little bit of ground after a bit of a wobble and a little bit of profit taking came into the market yesterday. In terms of the day ahead, of course, without the BLS jobs data, we will have extra attention focusing on some of the private sector surveys like the ISM Services PMI that we get out of the States this afternoon, which is set to point to a relatively solid clip of expansion in September in the sector. But I think fundamentally this may, of course, be famous last words. It should be a relatively slow and steady grind into the weekend for market participants, although do be aware, of course, there is the potential for gapping risk over the weekend. We do have an OPEC Plus meeting taking place on Sunday where we're likely to get potentially quite a significant output increase, which could put a bit of pressure on crude benchmarks on the Sunday night reopen. And of course, the ongoing negotiations over a government shutdown in Washington, D.C. And last but by no means least, here in the UK, today sees the OBR give the Chancellor their first pre-measures forecast. So we might have a whole load of Sunday papers which are full of leaks and pre-budget trial balloons. So potentially a volatile start to next week, but relatively little meat on the bones for market participants to get their teeth into as this week comes to a close.